a lot of times when a teenager has a traumatic brain injury, what happens, more common than not, is the child goes home to the parents. And the parents do what all loving parents do, is they crank down on the child and everything's great. There's no push. There's no push to get better. It's like, okay, honey, you're doing a good job. No, it's fine. They might be acting a fool in public. They might be speaking out, which are all normal things. Impulsivity is like a huge sign of a traumatic brain injury. And I still have issues with that, which is actually part of the reason I've been able to do a lot of the things I've done so quickly, because I'm just impulsive. I'm like, I have to write this book. Like, I have to, I'll stay up all night and write it, because I get really fixated on the desires that might come upon me, which can be really good or it can be bad.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, for me, it was I went home, but then a few months later I get married and I move away from home, go to a new city, Louisville, Kentucky, get an apartment by myself, which is kind of crazy that I did all that after just having this accident. Mm-hmm. And Chelsea and I get married, we move on campus, and now this new calling, it's calling Cameron. Cameron, you need to be this. Mm-hmm. Not just do that, but become this husband, become this, man. It's time to grow up. Like, again, sink or swim. Whereas if I wasn't engaged to her, I'd just be at my house with my parents, and this has nothing to do with them. This is just natural for all parents, where it's like you just want to coddle the child. And even if they don't coddle the child, there's still the issue of the push or the pull outside of the situation. I was pulled outside of the situation by the calling of marriage. That's a simple way to put it. I was pulled outside of my TBI in practicum by the calling of marriage.
So if you weren't married, you think it would have just been a longer road to recovery, if ever recovering the way that you did?
Yeah. If I would not. Yeah, my life would look very different.
That gives so much more meaning to, like, a partner, right?
Right.
Like a somebody who's specifically given to you by God to be a helper, right? Whether it's a husband or a wife,
right.
To be the companion. What do you think? Because we can talk about this stuff for so long. What do you think was the toughest part of healing from TBI? Because we keep saying TBI, he mentioned it, but just to reiterate, traumatic brain injury. Because every time you said that for a long time, I was like, what is TBI? So traumatic brain injury, like, there's the mental, the physical, the emotional, the spiritual, and the relational. There were things I thought of. Out of all of those things, what do you think was the hardest? I would imagine it wasn't the physical.
Right. And so,
even though if you knew Cameron and you saw the physical, you would think, like, that had to be the hardest recovery in the world. Like, your head was physically caved in. Like, like that. I mean, it was, pretty wild seeing the weight that you lost in the hospital, all that stuff, learning to literally talk again, walk, everything, right? Remembering who people were, saying words, all that stuff. But even then, I would say that probably wasn't the hardest part.
Well, you are correct. And that's kind of the surprise of the book, is how it so much is about a different kind of injury. And it's an injury I believe we all share. And I call it the subjective injury. So I had an objective injury that, MRI, X-rays, CTs, all these things could show axonal damage, fractures, skull fractures, and lacerations on my shoulders, and all these physical ailments. But what my hardest concern was, because I thought about your question, and I wanted to say emotional was the hardest thing for me. But I think what encapsulates all of it, and fitting in with the book, is personal. This personal struggle I had, where I wasn't able to do the things I used to be able to do. Couldn't hoop, couldn't play basketball like I used to be able to. I couldn't talk like I used to be able to. I was leading Bible studies. I loved talking on the radio and just very extroverted, enjoying people. But I couldn't do any of that. And I looked weird. I had to wear a helmet everywhere I went for 4 months because it was just skin and then brain.
Yeah.
And you could see it in my eyes. A lot of people with concussions, brain injuries, TBIs, you can just see it in their eyes. There's a glazed look. And I had that for at least a year or two after the accident.
Can I read something real quick?
Yep.
One of the questions I had sent you was, it was just it set the tone for the book, in my opinion, where you said, it was right before chapter 1, you said, I had to find myself again. It was page XVI. You said, this is your life. This is your forever life, Cameron. The way you feel today, depressed, dragged, undone, is the way you'll always feel. Those strange looks, they'll keep coming. Those close friends, they'll keep running. Those goals of yours, they'll need rewriting. When I read that, I was like, oh, like even now I kind of get chills thinking about that, like, because it's such a strong, like moving place to be in your mind, you know, and especially like to see where you've come now, like it's inspiring, but depressing at the same time. And not just because it happened to you, but because I think there are a lot of people that feel the same way and they haven't even gone through a traumatic brain injury. So I think it's just really relatable, you know?
Yeah, no, I'm glad. Yeah, that introduction, that you're speaking at the introductory chapter, that came together really well. I'm thankful that it did because it's important. I mean, it sets the whole stage for the book. And I like the next sentences after that. My reality had been thoroughly undressed. Naked I felt and ashamed I was, which if you're familiar with the biblical narrative, you'll understand those kind of implicit references there. And because what's interesting to get to the garden is that Adam and Eve had an identity given to them by God. Like it was just theirs. They already knew it. There was no question about it. But then this objective injury happens to me, and now I'm starting to question my identity. And I feel because I can't do the things I used to be able to do, I can't speak the way I used to be able to speak, all these used to be's. And so in having those issues, the ones you just read, I look weird, sound weird. Now my reality feels undressed. But that's if all I am is my objective reality, the way things look or the way I sound or the way I present myself. And
things we all care about.
Right. And I'm not devaluing any of those things because obviously I put them in the book because they were valuable and they still mean something to me and they affect people. Yeah. They're real. And so, there was a piece above that, the things I used to be able to do, the things I used to feel, how desperate the loss felt as if it was really real, referring to the loss of my felt identity. Yeah. And there is a good amount. There's a decent amount of poetry in the book. Yep. And there's fiction, there's nonfiction, there's autobiography, personal memoir, cultural analysis, sociopaths are in there. There's just a lot going on in the book because the book is very human. And that's kind of the point. It's a subject. It's not an object. It is an object, and I make that clear in the book, but it's
the writing.
But it's a human. I'm presenting myself here. I'm showing you the great things about me. I'm showing you the awful things about you. I'm showing you the great things about other people. I'm showing you some awful things about other people. And it's a very human book, which makes it very approachable. But with these concerns I had about how I looked, how I sounded, all those things, it was really hard. But what made it harder for me, and this gets at the emotional side, is that there was a darker kind of force that was overtaking me that really didn't care about other people for good or for bad. Where like I love my wife, but I want to kill myself. I have kids now, but I still want to kill myself. I'm a lawyer now, but I still want to kill myself. I've got a nice house. I've got a dog. I got a white picket fence or something. Yeah. I had all those things except for the white picket fence. Because the external environment did not change the internal environment. And that's that's so key in all of this for me and how I got better, because people want to know how I got better and how I got better the way I did. And I say it was by elevating my subjective problems over my objective ones. The objective ones are a problem, 100%. But the objective problems change the weight they have on your life when you have a different subjective change or a subjective perspective.
Yep.
Because, like, even if Job, of course, is a great example of this. Someone who had everything, and then he loses everything, and he's still saying, praise God. Praise God. It's like, okay, so if I have all these ducks in a row, if I do all the right medications and right exercises and get the right girl, get the right amount of kids, get the right degree, get the right job, all that, if I check all those boxes, will I be happy? Maybe. And I say maybe because some people do that and they are happy.
Yeah.
For a time, maybe forever. But what about you? It doesn't matter about other people. Like, how do you get happy? And how do you get happy with having a brain injury? How do you get happy with losing your abilities? Like, what if we focused on a different injury? And it wasn't the external one, it was the internal one. And I mean, again, like, this book gets into secular circles, it gets into Christian, theological, religious circles, because even if you don't want to embrace the divine, theological, metaphysical aspect of it, which is very in the book, there is just the whole talk about positive thinking. It's like, just be positive. But of course, you don't have a basis to be positive without the hope of the gospel. But, and you mentioned the apologetic side of it, because an apologetic it has nothing to do with an apology. It has everything to do with the historic sense of defending the faith. So a Christian apologetic, because this book is about finding the human subject in a world full of objects. So I use that, and I don't use that to scare people. That's why the first chapter of the book is very philosophical. And I originally put it in the appendix of the book because I didn't want to scare readers away.
Yeah, I mean, there's some sentences I had to read like 4 or 5 times.
Right. Oh, yeah. Well,
I'm not too bright, so
No, you're great.
when a lawyer writes a book, I'm like,
well, excuse me. That's what Brian Blair at the Republic, we talked over the weekend about it. He was one of the test readers as well.
Oh, nice.
And he said people are going to be blown away that you can write, because a lot of lawyers are good writers, but a lot of them are technical writers. There's no, it's all objective.
Yeah.
Here's the facts. There's no stylistic prose or things like that. So, not for every case, but that's just what he said. And so, and that's why
not a lot of storytelling, not a
not a lot of
not
storytelling.
A lot of creativity,
or
right. Flow,
right? The poetry and stuff like that, or even the theology. We don't get into the abstract that much.
And it's no offense to lawyers.
Right.
It's just, like, my sister's a lawyer, but it's like,
just,
she's not trying to write a book. And
right,
she's not
it's just,
trying to tell a story, and
right.
she's not trying to connect that story to the bigger, grander story, going on around us, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Although, trial lawyers are storytellers, for a jury and stuff, but it is different with this. I'm just saying what Brian said. This is what he said. He was just surprised that the book came out the way it did.
Yeah, go after Brian. Don't go after me.
No, right. No, he's wonderful. But so, subject, object, finding the human subject in a world full of objects. The reason that's important is because when I had the brain injury, it's like, okay, Cameron, you have this injury that most people say is the most personal injury you can have. Because the brain is the physical conduit through which we have spiritual consciousness, you could say.
Yeah.
By the brain is affected everything. And so to damage the brain means kind of to damage everything else. And so it feels very personal, because you can't do the things you're supposed to do and all those things. But the hope for me was in my faith that I'm more than a brain. But the brain injury told me I was not more than a brain, because of how much it sucked and how hard it was and how hard it still is at times. because it sure does feel like I'm all a brain because I can't do the things these people do. People look at me weird. I can't pronounce words correctly. I stutter or whatever it was difficult. And so if I wanted to have hope and encouragement beyond the injury, I had to find something beyond the injury. But I needed to find more than something. I needed to find someone.
Yeah.
And so this connects Chelsea. I found someone. But then ultimately it connects God to the whole thing because I found not just a mysterious force,
Yeah.
but a personal God.
Yeah.
A subjective power near and dear and available to all. As Paul says, in him we live and move and have our being.
Yeah.
So it's hugely important for me to have found something I could be regardless of life's happenings. And what is that? It's God.